It was a sunny afternoon in the quiet little neighborhood of Maple Grove. The sun was shining bright in the big blue sky, and little fluffy clouds floated high above. Down below, kids were riding their bikes up and down the street. Some had bright red bikes, others had blue ones with little bells that went ding-ding as they pedaled. You could hear them laughing and shouting to each other, having the best time ever. Birds were chirping, too, hopping from tree to tree, singing their happy little songs. Everything seemed perfect in Maple Grove. Well, almost everything. See, Maple Grove was a nice place to live. The houses were small but cozy, with green lawns and pretty flowers in the front yards. People waved to each other when they walked by. Dogs barked in a friendly way when you passed their fences. It was the kind of place where you felt safe and happy, like nothing bad could ever happen. But sometimes, even in a perfect place like this, trouble sneaks in. And that's exactly what was about to happen on this sunny day. Let me tell you about my neighbor, Tim. Tim was a cool guy. He lived in the house right next to mine. His house was painted light blue, and it had a big front porch where he liked to sit sometimes. Tim was the kind of person who never got mad or upset. He was always calm, always smiling. If you said hi to him, he'd say hi back with a big grin. Everybody liked Tim because he was so nice and easy to talk to. He didn't cause problems, and he didn't pick fights. He was just a chill dude who minded his own business. Tim had a cat, too. Her name was Whiskers, and she was the cutest little thing you ever saw. Whiskers was an orange cat with soft, fluffy fur that looked like the color of a pumpkin. Her eyes were big and green, and they sparkled when she looked at you. She had a little pink nose and tiny white whiskers that stuck out on both sides of her face. Whiskers wasn't one of those cats who stayed inside all the time. Oh no, she loved to explore. She'd run out of Tim's house and wander all over the neighborhood, sniffing flowers, chasing butterflies, or just sitting in the sun. She was a free spirit, that cat, and everybody in Maple Grove knew her. Now, one of Whiskers' favorite spots to hang out was my lawn. My house was right next to Tim's, and I had a nice patch of green grass in front of it. The grass was soft and cool, and when the sun hit it just right, it was the perfect place for a nap. Whiskers thought so, too. Almost every day, she'd stroll over from Tim's yard, her little tail swishing back and forth, and plop down on my lawn. She'd stretch out her tiny paws, close her big green eyes, and just soak up the sunshine. It was so cute to watch. Sometimes I'd sit on my porch with a glass of lemonade and smile at her. She looked so peaceful, like she didn't have a care in the world. I didn't mind Whiskers being on my lawn. Not one bit. She wasn't hurting anything. She didn't dig holes or scratch up my grass. She just napped there, quiet as can be. Sometimes she'd roll over on her back and wiggle around a little, like she was playing a game with herself. It made me laugh every time. I'd think, what a funny little cat. Tim didn't mind either. He'd see her out there and say, "Oh, there's Whiskers, doing her thing again." We'd both chuckle about it. To us, it was no big deal. Just a cat enjoying a sunny day. But not everybody felt that way. Nope, not everybody. There was one person in Maple Grove who didn't like Whiskers one little bit. And that person was Karen. Oh boy, Karen was a whole different story. Let me tell you about Karen. Karen lived a few houses down from me and Tim. Her house was bigger than most, with fancy windows and a tall fence around the yard. She was the president of the HOA. Now, if you don't know what an HOA is, it's like a group of people who make rules for the neighborhood. They decide things like how tall your grass can be or what color you can paint your house. It's supposed to keep everything nice and neat. And Karen? She loved being in charge of it. She acted like she was the queen of Maple Grove, telling everybody what to do and how to do it. Karen wasn't like Tim. She wasn't chill or nice. She was loud and bossy. If you didn't follow her rules, she'd march right up to your door and yell at you. Her face would get all red, and she'd wave her arms around like she was trying to scare you. Nobody really liked Karen. We didn't hate her, exactly, but we didn't enjoy her company either. Most of us just smiled and waved when we saw her, hoping she'd leave us alone. What else can you do when someone's so grumpy all the time? Karen had short brown hair that she kept tucked behind her ears. She always wore big sunglasses, even when it wasn't sunny, and she carried a little notebook where she wrote down every rule somebody broke. If your trash can was out too long, she'd write it down. If your dog barked too much, she'd write it down. She was always watching, always waiting for someone to mess up. And when she caught you, she'd give you this big speech about how important the rules were. It was exhausting just listening to her. Now, Karen didn't like Whiskers. Not one bit. To her, that little orange cat was a troublemaker. See, the HOA had rules about pets. One rule said pets weren't supposed to wander around without a leash. Dogs had to be on leashes, and Karen thought cats should be, too. She'd say, animals need to be controlled. They can't just run wild. But Whiskers didn't have a leash. She was a cat, not a dog, and Tim let her roam free. That drove Karen crazy. Every time she saw Whiskers walking around, her nose would scrunch up like she smelled something bad, and she'd mutter under her breath. It wasn't just that Whiskers was free. It was where she went. Karen especially hated that Whiskers liked to nap on my lawn. To Karen, my lawn wasn't just a lawn, it was private property. And in her mind, Whiskers didn't belong there. She'd stand on the sidewalk, staring at that cat stretched out in the sun, and her hands would ball up into fists. That cat is breaking the rules, she'd say to herself. It's a menace. A criminal. Can you believe that? Calling a cute little cat a criminal? But that's how Karen thought. Everything had to be perfect, and Whiskers was messing it all up. I didn't get why it bothered her so much. It was just a cat. She wasn't hurting anybody. She wasn't loud or messy. She didn't knock over trash cans or chase people. She just napped. But Karen couldn't stand it. Every time she saw Whiskers on my lawn, she'd get madder and madder. I could see it in her face, the way her eyes narrowed and her mouth turned into a thin, angry line. She'd stomp her foot sometimes, like a kid throwing a tantrum. It was kind of funny, but also kind of weird. Why was she so upset about something so small? Tim didn't know it yet, but all this anger was building up inside Karen. He didn't see the trouble coming. He was too busy being his chill self, hanging out on his porch or playing with Whiskers. He'd toss her a little toy mouse sometimes, and she'd pounce on it with her tiny paws. They were a happy pair, Tim and Whiskers, just living their lives. They didn't think about Karen or her rules. Why would they? They weren't doing anything wrong. But trouble was brewing. Oh yes, it was. Karen wasn't going to let this go. She had a plan, and it was a big one. See, she didn't just want to complain about Whiskers. She wanted to do something about it. She wanted to show everybody in Maple Grove that she was in charge, that her rules mattered more than anything. And she was about to make a move that would surprise us all. It started on that sunny afternoon. The kids were still riding their bikes, the birds were still chirping, and Whiskers was napping on my lawn like usual. I was on my porch, sipping my lemonade, watching the world go by. Everything felt normal. But then I saw Karen. She was standing across the street, staring at Whiskers. Her sunglasses were on, her notebook was in her hand, and she had this look on her face like she'd finally had enough. I didn't know what she was thinking, but I could tell it wasn't good. What Karen didn't know, what none of us knew yet, was that her big plan was going to backfire. She thought she was so smart, so powerful, but she was about to step into a mess she couldn't get out of. Her big mouth, the one she used to yell at everybody, was going to get her in trouble. Big trouble. And it all started with that little orange cat napping on my lawn. See, Karen thought Whiskers was the problem. She thought if she could get rid of that cat, everything would be perfect again. But she didn't see the bigger picture. She didn't know that something else was going on in Maple Grove, something she couldn't control. While she was busy getting mad about a cat, other people were watching her. People who didn't like her rules or her bossy ways. People who had secrets of their own. I didn't know it yet either. I was just sitting there, enjoying my lemonade, thinking about how cute Whiskers looked with her paws in the air. I had no idea what was coming. Neither did Tim. Neither did anybody. But it was coming, all right. Trouble was sneaking up on us, quiet as a mouse, and Karen was about to light the fuse. That's how it started, friends. A sunny day, a little cat, and a grumpy lady with too many rules. It sounds simple, doesn't it? But oh, it's not. This story's got twists and turns, and I can't wait to tell you what happens next. Karen's about to do something wild, something nobody expected. And when she does, everything in Maple Grove is going to change. So stick with me, okay? We're just getting started. That little cat on my lawn? She's more important than you think. And Karen? She's about to learn a lesson she'll never forget. What do you think she's going to do? Take a guess, I'll tell you soon. Let's rewind a little bit and talk more about Maple Grove. Like I said, it was a quiet place. The streets were lined with trees, big, tall ones with green leaves that rustled when the wind blew. In the spring, those trees would bloom with pink and white flowers that smelled so sweet you could catch the scent from a block away. In the summer, like now, the leaves were thick and shady, making little patches of cool spots on the sidewalks. Kids loved riding their bikes under those trees, zooming in and out of the shadows, pretending they were on some big adventure. The houses in Maple Grove were all different, but they had one thing in common: they looked happy. My house was yellow with a red door. Tim's was light blue with a big porch. Karen's was white with that tall fence I told you about. Some houses had swings in the front yard, others had little gardens with tomatoes and sunflowers growing tall. Everybody took care of their homes, even if Karen complained about them all the time. She'd say things like, "Your mailbox is crooked," or "Your grass is too long." But most people just nodded and fixed it to keep her quiet. Tim's house was one of the coziest. He didn't have a fancy garden or a big fence, but he had that porch I mentioned. It had a wooden rocking chair where he'd sit sometimes, reading a book or just watching the world go by. Whiskers liked the porch, too. She'd curl up next to Tim's chair, her fluffy tail wrapped around her like a blanket. Sometimes I'd walk by and see them there together, Tim rocking back and forth, Whiskers snoozing away. It was a nice sight, the kind that made you feel warm inside. Tim wasn't a loud guy. He didn't throw big parties or play music that shook the windows. He was quiet, but not in a shy way. He just didn't need to be the center of attention. He had short black hair and wore old t-shirts and jeans most of the time. His sneakers were always a little dirty, like he'd been walking through the grass or kicking a ball around. He worked at a store downtown, selling tools and stuff for fixing houses. He liked his job, and he'd come home every day with a smile, ready to relax with Whiskers. Whiskers was his best buddy. Tim found her a few years ago when she was just a tiny kitten. She'd been hiding under a bush near his house, meowing so loud he couldn't ignore her. He scooped her up, brought her inside, and that was that. They'd been together ever since. Tim didn't care about the HOA rules. He figured cats were supposed to be free, not locked up or tied to a leash. "She's got a wild heart," he'd say, laughing. "I can't keep her in a cage." And he was right, Whiskers loved her freedom. I liked Whiskers, too. She wasn't my cat, but she felt like part of the neighborhood. Sometimes she'd wander over to my porch and rub against my legs, purring like a little motor. I'd scratch her behind the ears, and she'd close her eyes, happy as can be. She was friendly like that. Not all cats are, you know. Some cats run away or hiss if you get too close. But Whiskers. She'd say hello to anybody who was nice to her. My lawn was her favorite spot, though. I don't know why she picked it. Maybe it was the way the sun hit it just right, making it warm and cozy. Maybe it was because my grass was extra soft. I tried to keep it nice, watering it every few days. Whatever the reason, Whiskers claimed it as her own. She'd show up every afternoon, flop down, and nap for hours. Sometimes she'd chase a bug or two before settling in, her little paws swatting at a grasshopper or a ladybug. Then she'd yawn, stretch, and doze off. It was her routine, and I loved watching it. Karen didn't love it, though. Not at all. She'd walk by my house almost every day, checking on things. She called it patrolling the neighborhood, like she was some kind of sheriff. She'd wear those big sunglasses and carry that notebook, scribbling notes about anything she didn't like. When she saw Whiskers on my lawn, she'd stop dead in her tracks. Her head would tilt, her lips would press together, and she'd glare at that cat like it was her worst enemy. I saw it happen a bunch of times. One day, I was pulling weeds from my flower bed when Karen came marching down the sidewalk. She had on a bright pink shirt and white shorts, her sunglasses perched on her nose. She stopped right in front of my house, staring at Whiskers. The cat was napping, her little belly rising and falling with each breath. Karen didn't say anything at first. She just stood there, her arms crossed, tapping her foot on the ground. Then she muttered, "This is ridiculous. That cat shouldn't be here." I looked up from my weeds and said, "Hey, Karen. She's not bothering anybody." I tried to keep it friendly, you know. No point in starting a fight. But Karen didn't care. She turned to me, her sunglasses sliding down a little, and snapped, "It's not about bothering people. It's about the rules. Pets aren't allowed to roam free. This is private property." I shrugged and said, "It's my lawn, though. I don't mind." That made her even madder. She huffed, scribbled something in her notebook, and stormed off. I just shook my head and went back to my weeds. That wasn't the only time she got mad about Whiskers. Another day, I was mowing my grass when she came by. Whiskers was sitting near the edge of the lawn, licking her paws. Karen stopped, pointed at her, and said, "That cat needs to be on a leash." I turned off the mower and laughed. "A leash? She's a cat, Karen, not a dog." But Karen didn't think it was funny. She said, "The rules apply to all pets. If Timothy can't control her, maybe he shouldn't have her." Then she walked away, muttering about standards and disrespect. Tim heard about that one later. I told him over a soda on his porch. He just grinned and said, "Karen's nuts. Whiskers isn't hurting a soul." I nodded and said, "Yeah, she's making a big deal out of nothing." We both laughed about it, thinking Karen would get over it eventually. But we were wrong. She wasn't going to let it go. She was cooking up something big, something that would shake up the whole neighborhood. See, Karen didn't just want Whiskers gone. She wanted to prove a point. She wanted everybody to know that she was the boss, that her rules were the law. She thought if she could get rid of that cat, people would take her seriously. She'd been the HOA president for 2 years, and she loved the power it gave her. She loved telling people what to do, loved seeing them jump when she barked orders. But lately, people weren't jumping as much. They were getting tired of her. And that made her mad. What Karen didn't know was that her bossy ways were about to bite her back. She didn't see the storm coming. She was too busy glaring at Whiskers, too busy writing in her notebook, too busy thinking she was smarter than everybody else. But trouble doesn't care how smart you think you are. Trouble comes when you least expect it. And for Karen, it was coming soon. That sunny afternoon, while I sipped my lemonade and Whiskers napped on my lawn, Karen was plotting. She stood across the street, watching us, her mind racing. She didn't know it yet, but her big plan was going to flop. Her loud voice, her angry words, they were about to get her into a mess she couldn't escape. And it all started with that little orange cat, stretching out in the sun, not knowing she was at the center of it all. It was a regular day in Maple Grove, just like any other. The sun was up, the sky was blue, and I was sitting on my porch with a cold glass of lemonade. The lemonade was sweet and tangy, just how I like it, with little ice cubes clinking against the glass. I was taking small sips, watching the world go by. Kids were still riding their bikes down the street, their voices bouncing around as they laughed and called to each other. A soft breeze blew through, rustling the leaves on the big trees that lined the neighborhood. Everything felt calm and nice. But then, out of nowhere, things got loud. I looked up from my lemonade and saw Karen. Oh boy, there she was, storming across the street like she was on a mission. Her face was red, her short brown hair bouncing as she marched. She had her phone pressed tight against her ear, holding it with one hand while the other waved around like she was swatting a fly. Karen was yelling so loud I bet the whole block could hear her. Her voice was sharp and angry, cutting through the peaceful afternoon like a siren. "Yes, 911, she shouted into the phone. "There's a stray animal on private property. It's a menace. I demand you send someone right now." I froze with my glass halfway to my mouth. Did I hear that right? A stray animal? A menace? I looked around, confused, trying to figure out what she was talking about. Then I saw it, Whiskers. That little orange cat was napping on my lawn, just like she always did. Her fluffy fur was glowing in the sun, her tiny paws stretched out, her eyes closed tight. She looked so peaceful, so cute. And Karen was calling her a menace. I couldn't believe it. My jaw dropped. A cat. On my lawn. And she's calling the cops? I mean, come on, lady, relax. Whiskers wasn't doing anything wrong. She wasn't barking or scratching or running wild. She was just lying there, sleeping like a little baby. I set my lemonade down on the porch table and leaned forward, watching Karen. She was still yelling into her phone, pacing back and forth on the sidewalk. "Yes, it's an orange cat," she said. "It's been here all day. This is unacceptable. Unacceptable." I shook my head. This was nuts. Just then, Tim stepped out of his house. His blue front door creaked open, and he walked onto his porch, scratching his head. Tim looked sleepy, like maybe he'd been taking a nap, too. His black hair was a little messy, and he was wearing his usual old t-shirt and jeans. He squinted across the street at Karen, trying to figure out what all the noise was about. Then he saw Whiskers on my lawn and tilted his head, puzzled. "Karen," Tim called out, his voice calm and slow, "that's my cat. He's not hurting anyone." He took a step down from his porch, hands in his pockets, just trying to talk to her. Tim was like that. He didn't get mad or shout. He just wanted to clear things up. But Karen? Oh, she wasn't having it. She spun around so fast her sunglasses almost flew off her face. She pointed a finger at Tim, her eyes wide and wild, and snapped back at him. "Rules are rules, Timothy," she barked. "That beast doesn't belong here, and neither do people who can't follow orders." Her voice was loud and mean, like she was scolding a naughty kid. She puffed up her chest, standing tall like she was the queen of Maple Grove. Her finger jabbed the air with every word, and her face got even redder. I could see little beads of sweat on her forehead. She was mad. Really, really mad. Tim blinked at her, surprised. He opened his mouth to say something, but then he just closed it again. He scratched his head one more time, sighed, and turned around. He walked back into his house, letting the door shut behind him with a soft click. Tim was too nice to argue. He didn't like fighting, especially not with someone like Karen. He'd rather just let it go and forget about it. I watched him disappear inside, thinking, poor Tim. He doesn't deserve this. But me? I wasn't ready to let it go. I stayed on my porch, staring at Karen. She was still on the phone, yelling at the 911 person. "No, it's not my cat," she said. "It's trespassing. This is a serious issue." Trespassing. I almost laughed out loud. Whiskers wasn't breaking into a bank or stealing anything. She was just a cat taking a nap. But Karen kept going, her voice getting louder and louder. She was making a huge deal out of nothing, and it didn't make sense. I took another sip of my lemonade, letting the cold drink cool me down. My mind started spinning. Why was Karen so worked up? I mean, sure, she didn't like Whiskers wandering around. She'd complained about it before, saying stuff like pets need to be controlled, and this is against the rules. But calling 911? That was next level crazy. The police had better things to do than chase a cat off my lawn. Didn't they? I started to wonder if something else was going on. Karen wasn't just mad about Whiskers. She couldn't be. Nobody gets this upset over a little cat. I leaned back in my chair, watching her stomp around. She was still talking, but now she'd lowered her voice a little, like she didn't want me to hear. Her free hand was on her hip, and she kept glancing at my lawn, then at Tim's house, then back at my lawn. Her eyes were narrow, like she was plotting something. It gave me a funny feeling in my stomach, like when you know a storm's coming but the sky's still clear. I thought about Karen and how she acted. She was always bossy, always telling people what to do. She'd march around Maple Grove with her notebook, writing down every little thing she didn't like. If your trash can was out too late, she'd knock on your door and lecture you. If your dog barked once, she'd leave a note on your mailbox. She loved being in charge, loved making rules. But lately, people weren't listening to her as much. I'd seen it, neighbors rolling their eyes when she walked by, whispering to each other about how tired they were of her. Maybe that's why she was so mad about Whiskers. Maybe it wasn't just about the cat. Maybe it was about control. Whiskers didn't follow her rules, and neither did Tim. And me? I didn't care about her rules either. I liked having Whiskers on my lawn. It made me happy. But to Karen, that was a problem. She wanted everybody to do what she said, and when we didn't, It drove her crazy. Calling 911 was her way of fighting back, of showing us who's boss. But still, it felt like more than that. I couldn't shake the feeling that Karen was hiding something. She was too worked up, too quick to call the cops. Most people would just grumble and move on. Not Karen. She was acting like Whiskers was some big threat, like that little cat was ruining her whole world. Why? What was she so afraid of? I tapped my fingers on the arm of my chair, thinking hard. Something didn't add up. I looked over at Whiskers again. She was still napping, her little chest moving up and down as she breathed. She didn't even know Karen was yelling about her. She didn't know the 911 lady was probably confused on the other end of the phone. Whiskers was just being a cat-free, happy, and calm. It was hard to imagine anyone getting so mad at her. But Karen wasn't like most people. She saw trouble where there wasn't any. Or maybe she was making trouble to cover up something else. I remembered something Tim told me a few days ago. We'd been sitting on his porch, drinking soda and watching Whiskers chase a butterfly. He'd said, "Karen's been weird lately. She keeps peeking out her windows, like she's watching for something." I'd laughed then, thinking he was joking. But now it didn't seem so funny. What if Tim was right? What if Karen was nervous about something bigger than a cat? What if she was using Whiskers as an excuse? My lemonade was getting warm now, the ice melting into little puddles in the glass. I set it down and stood up, stretching my arms. Karen was still on the phone, but she'd moved a little farther down the street, out of earshot. I couldn't hear her anymore, but I could see her pacing, her head bobbing as she talked. She looked like someone with a secret, someone who didn't want anybody to find out what she was really up to. I sat back down, my mind racing. Tim was inside his house, probably shaking his head at all this nonsense. Whiskers was still napping, totally clueless. And Karen? She was out there, calling the cops on a cat, acting like it was the crime of the century. It was wild. It was ridiculous. But it was also suspicious. The more I thought about it, the more I wondered. What was Karen hiding? Why was she so loud, so angry? Was she trying to distract us from something? The breeze picked up again, blowing across my porch. It felt nice, but it didn't calm me down. I was starting to feel tense, like something big was about to happen. Karen's voice had quieted, but I could still see her shadow moving back and forth on the sidewalk. She wasn't giving up. She was serious about this 911 call. And that made me serious, too. I didn't know what was coming, but I had a hunch it wasn't just about Whiskers. Maple Grove didn't feel so peaceful anymore. The kids' laughter was still there, the birds were still chirping, but Karen's yelling had changed everything. Trouble was in the air, and I could feel it. Tim was too nice to fight her, but I wasn't sure I could stay quiet much longer. Karen was pushing too hard, and I was starting to push back in my head, at least. I wanted answers. I wanted to know why she was acting this way. I decided to keep watching. I picked up my lemonade again, even though it was mostly water now, and took a sip. My eyes stayed on Karen. She'd stopped pacing and was standing still, her phone still at her ear. She wasn't yelling anymore, but her lips were moving fast, like she was explaining something. Every few seconds, she'd glance at my lawn, then at Tim's house, then back at my lawn. It was like she couldn't take her eyes off Whiskers, even though the cat hadn't moved an inch. I wondered what the 911 lady was saying on the other end. Was she confused? Annoyed? I mean, who calls the police about a napping cat? I pictured the lady sitting at a desk, her headset on, listening to Karen ramble. Maybe she was thinking, is this for real? Maybe she was trying not to laugh. I sure wanted to laugh, but I couldn't. Not yet. This was too weird to be funny. Karen's hand dropped from her hip, and she started tapping her foot. Tap, tap, tap over and over, like she was impatient. She wanted those cops to show up fast, I could tell. She kept looking down the street, like she expected a police car to roll up any second. I looked, too, but the street was empty. No cars, no cops, just a couple of kids pedaling by on their bikes. They slowed down to stare at Karen, then sped off, giggling. Even they knew something was up. I leaned forward in my chair, resting my elbows on my knees. My porch had a good view of the whole street, and I didn't want to miss a thing. Karen was acting like a crazy person, and I needed to see what she'd do next. Would she hang up and give up? Would she march over here and yell at me? Or would the cops actually show up? I didn't know, but I was hooked. This was better than TV. Tim's door stayed closed. I figured he was inside, maybe sitting on his couch, petting Whiskers' toy mouse or something. He wasn't the type to come back out and argue. That was fine by me. I didn't want him getting yelled at again. Karen's words were still ringing in my ears, that beast doesn't belong here, and neither do people who can't follow orders. Ouch. She'd called Whiskers a beast and basically told Tim he didn't fit in. That was harsh, even for her. I started thinking about Tim. He'd lived in Maple Grove longer than me. His blue house had been his home for years, way before Karen became HOA president. He'd told me once how he moved here because it was quiet and friendly. Best place I've ever lived, he'd said, smiling. He didn't deserve Karen's mean words. Nobody did. But that's how she was, always picking on people, always trying to make them feel small. Whiskers didn't deserve it either. That little cat was the sweetest thing. She'd never hurt a fly, well, maybe a fly, but not a person. She was gentle and playful, always purring when you pet her. I remembered one time when she jumped onto my porch and dropped a leaf at my feet, like it was a gift. I'd laughed and said, "Thanks, Whiskers." She'd meowed back, her tail flicking. How could anyone call her a menace? It didn't make sense. But to Karen, it made perfect sense. In her world, rules were everything. If you broke one, even a tiny one, you were a problem. And Whiskers. She was breaking the no roaming pet rule every single day. Karen couldn't stand that. She couldn't stand anything she couldn't control. I'd seen her flip out over little things before, like when Mr. Jenkins left his car parked on the street overnight, or when Mrs. Lopez planted flowers that were too bright for the neighborhood. Karen always had to have the last word. This time, though, she wasn't just complaining. She was calling the cops. That was a big step, even for her. I rubbed my chin, thinking. Why go that far? Why not just write Tim a nasty note or bang on his door? She'd done that before last month. She'd left a letter on his mailbox about his grass being too tall. Tim had shrugged and mowed it the next day. Problem solved. So why was this different? Why was Whiskers such a huge deal? I glanced at Karen again. She'd hung up the phone now and was standing with her arms crossed, staring at my lawn. Her sunglasses hid her eyes, but I could tell she was fuming. Her mouth was a tight line, and her shoulders were stiff. She looked like a volcano about to blow. I half expected steam to come out of her ears, like in a cartoon. But this wasn't funny. It was getting serious. I stood up and walked to the edge of my porch, leaning on the railing. "Hey, Karen," I called out, keeping my voice friendly. "You okay over there?" I didn't really care if she was okay, I just wanted to see what she'd say. She turned her head slowly, like she was a robot, and glared at me. "This isn't your business," she snapped. "Stay out of it." Then she turned back to my lawn, ignoring me. Oof. That was cold. I stepped back, raising my hands like, "Okay, fine." I didn't want to poke the bear too much. But her words stuck with me. "This isn't your business." Huh. It was my business, wasn't it? Whiskers was on my lawn. If the cops showed up, they'd be at my house. How was that not my business? Karen was acting like she owned the whole street, like my lawn belonged to her, too. I sat down again, my mind buzzing. Karen was hiding something, I was sure of it now. She was too angry, too pushy. Normal people don't call 911 over a cat unless they're trying to cover up something else. I didn't know what it was yet, but I could feel it. Like a itch I couldn't scratch. Something was off, and Karen was at the center of it. The street was quiet again, except for the sound of Karen's foot tapping. The kids had ridden off, the birds were still chirping, and Whiskers was still napping. But the tension was thick, like a heavy blanket over Maple Grove. I didn't know what was going to happen next, but I knew one thing, Karen wasn't done. She'd started something, and it was going to get bigger. I just hoped Tim and Whiskers wouldn't get hurt in the mess. The next day started out normal. The sun was up, shining bright over Maple Grove. Birds were chirping in the trees, and a soft wind was blowing, making the leaves wiggle. I was sitting on my porch again, just like yesterday, with a fresh glass of lemonade. The ice cubes clinked in the glass as I took a sip, watching the neighborhood wake up. Kids weren't out yet, it was still early, but I could hear a dog barking a few houses down. Everything felt quiet and peaceful, like nothing weird could happen. But then, something weird did happen. I noticed it out of the corner of my eye. A police car rolled up the street. It was moving slow, real quiet, with no sirens or lights flashing. The car was white with blue stripes, and I could see two officers inside, wearing their dark uniforms. They stopped right in front of Karen's house, just a few doors down from me. The engine shut off, and the two cops stepped out. One was tall with a hat pulled low over his eyes. The other was shorter, holding a little notebook in his hand. They walked up to Karen's front door, their boots making soft thumps on her walkway, and knocked. 3 loud knocks, bang, bang, bang. I sat up straight, my lemonade almost spilling. My heart started beating a little faster. Wait, I thought, did they really come for Whiskers? Was Karen's crazy 911 call actually working? I couldn't believe it. I mean, cops showing up over a cat napping on my lawn? That sounded like something out of a silly movie, not real life. I put my glass down and leaned forward, watching close. I didn't want to miss a thing. Karen's door creaked open a few seconds later. There she was, standing in the doorway. She had on a green shirt and those big sunglasses perched on her head, not over her eyes this time. But something was off about her. She didn't look like the loud, bossy Karen from yesterday. She looked nervous. Like, sweaty, fidgety nervous. Her hands were moving all over the place, waving, tugging at her shirt, then crossing her arms, then waving again. Her face was shiny with sweat, even though it wasn't that hot out. She was talking fast, her lips moving a mile a minute, but I was too far away to hear what she was saying. Her voice sounded high and shaky, though, like she was scared. The cops didn't say much. They just stood there, watching her. The tall one tilted his head a little, like he was listening hard. The shorter one flipped open his notebook and started writing something down with a pen. They didn't smile or nod or anything, they just stared at Karen, letting her talk. It was weird. If they were here about Whiskers, wouldn't they be asking about the cat? Wouldn't they come to my house, since that's where Whiskers was? But they didn't. They stayed right there at Karen's door, not moving an inch. I looked over at my lawn. Sure enough, Whiskers was back. That little orange cat was sprawled out in the grass, napping like nothing was wrong. Her fluffy fur was glowing in the sunlight, and her tiny paws were stretched out in front of her. She looked so calm, so happy. Every now and then, her tail would twitch a little, like she was dreaming about chasing a bug or something. I smiled at her, thinking, you've got no idea what's going on, do you? Whiskers didn't have a clue about Karen or the cops or any of this mess. She was just doing her thing, same as always. But my smile didn't last long. I couldn't stop watching Karen and those cops. Something wasn't right. If they were here about the cat, why was Karen so jumpy? Why wasn't she pointing at my lawn and yelling, like she did yesterday? I squinted, trying to figure it out. Karen was still talking, her hands flailing around. The tall cop said something, I couldn't hear it, but Karen stopped for a second, then started talking even faster. The shorter cop kept writing in his notebook, his pen moving quick across the page. They weren't leaving. They weren't walking away or getting back in their car. They just stood there, like they had all the time in the world. I grabbed my phone from the table next to me. My hands were a little shaky, not a lot, just enough to notice. I opened my messages and texted Tim. Dude, I typed, cops are at Karen's. What's up? I hit send and waited, staring at my screen. Tim was probably inside his house, maybe eating breakfast or playing with Whiskers. It took a minute, but my phone buzzed with his reply. No idea, he wrote back, but she's been acting strange lately. Keeps peeking out her windows. I read it twice, my eyebrows going up. Strange. Yeah, that was an understatement. I looked back at Karen's house. She was still at the door, still talking to the cops. Tim's text stuck in my head. Peeking out her windows. What did that mean? I thought about it. Karen lived alone in that big white house with the tall fence. She didn't have a dog or a cat or anybody to keep her company. She was always out front, bossing people around, but Tim was right lately, she'd been quieter. Not nicer, just quieter. I'd seen her a few times, standing at her window, pulling the curtain back just a little to look outside. Her sunglasses would be on, even inside, and she'd stare at the street for a long time before letting the curtain fall. Why was she doing that? Was she watching for something? Someone. I tapped my phone against my leg, thinking hard. Karen was the HOA president, sure, but she wasn't a spy or anything. She was just a grumpy lady who liked rules. Or was she? The more I thought about it, the weirder it got. Yesterday, she'd called 911 about Whiskers, yelling like it was the end of the world. Today, cops were at her door, and she was acting like a nervous wreck. This wasn't just about a cat. It couldn't be. I set my phone down and leaned back in my chair, my eyes glued to Karen's house. The cops were still there. The tall one had his hands on his hips now, and the shorter one was nodding at something Karen said. She wasn't waving her hands as much anymore, but she still looked sweaty and twitchy. I couldn't hear her, but I could tell she was trying to explain something. Maybe she was telling them about Whiskers, saying how that beast was breaking all her precious rules. But if that was it, why weren't they coming over here? Why weren't they asking me or Tim about it? Whiskers rolled over on my lawn, her little belly showing as she stretched. I almost laughed, she was so cute, so clueless. But then I stopped myself. This wasn't funny. Something was going on, and I didn't like it. I started to think maybe the cat drama was a trick. Maybe Karen was using Whiskers to hide something else. A distraction, like when you wave one hand so nobody sees what the other hand's doing. But a distraction from what? I remembered yesterday Karen storming around, yelling into her phone, calling Whiskers a menace. She'd been so loud, so angry. Too angry, really. It was just a cat. Even for Karen, that was a lot. And now, seeing her with the cops, all nervous and shaky, it didn't add up. If she was so sure she was right about Whiskers, why wasn't she acting tough? Why wasn't she standing tall, pointing fingers, telling the cops to go get that criminal cat? Instead, she looked like she wanted to run away. I picked up my lemonade and took a big sip, letting the cold drink wake me up. My brain was buzzing with questions. What was Karen hiding? Why were the cops at her house? And why was she acting so strange lately, like Tim said? I looked at Whiskers again. She was back to napping, her little nose twitching. She didn't care about any of this. But I did. I cared a lot. The cops still didn't leave. They'd been at Karen's door for at least 10 minutes now. That was a long time just to talk about a cat, right? I started counting in my head 1 minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes watching them. The tall cop said something else, and Karen shook her head fast, like she didn't agree. The shorter cop wrote more in his notebook. I wished I could hear them. I wished I could sneak closer and listen. But I stayed on my porch, keeping my eyes peeled. Then I thought about Tim's text again. She's been acting strange lately. Keeps peeking out her windows. Strange was the perfect word. Karen was always loud and bossy, but sneaky. Nervous. That was new. I tried to picture her at her window, peeking out. What was she looking for? Was she scared of something? Or was she waiting for something? My stomach did a little flip. This was getting spooky. I decided to text Tim again. Dude, I wrote, what do you mean strange? Like how? I hit send and waited. The cops were still at Karen's door, and she was still talking. My phone buzzed a minute later. Tim's reply said, she's jumpy. Keeps looking around, like she's checking if someone's watching her. Saw her do it 3 times yesterday. I read it and frowned. Jumpy. Checking if someone's watching her? That didn't sound like the Karen I knew. The Karen I knew marched around like she owned the place. She didn't care who saw her, she wanted people to see her, to listen to her. But Tim was saying she was acting different now. Scared, maybe. Hiding something, definitely. I looked at her house again. The cops were still there, and Karen was still fidgeting. The tall cop took a step closer to her, and she took a step back, bumping into her door frame. She looked trapped. I set my phone down and rubbed my hands together. My palms were sweaty, even though I wasn't hot. This was getting wild. First, Karen calls 911 about Whiskers. Then, cops show up at her house, not mine, not Tim's, and she's a nervous mess. And now Tim's telling me she's been acting strange for days. It was like a puzzle, and I didn't have all the pieces yet. But I was starting to guess. Maybe Karen wasn't mad about Whiskers at all. Maybe she was using the cat as an excuse. An excuse for what? I didn't know. But I had a feeling it was something big. Something she didn't want anybody to find out. Yesterday, she'd been loud and angry, making a huge fuss. Today, she was quiet and scared, sweating in front of the cops. That wasn't normal. That wasn't Karen. Whiskers yawned on my lawn, showing her tiny teeth. I smiled a little, but my mind was still racing. The cops weren't here about her, I was pretty sure of that now. They were here about Karen. But why? What had she done? I leaned forward again, watching her house like a hawk. The tall cop was talking now, pointing at something inside Karen's house. She shook her head again, harder this time, and her voice got loud enough for me to hear one word: no. No. No what? My ears perked up. I wanted to run over there and ask, but I didn't. I stayed put, my heart thumping. The shorter cop closed his notebook and slipped it into his pocket. The tall cop nodded at Karen, then turned to walk back to the car. The shorter one followed him. Karen stood in her doorway, breathing hard, her hands clenched into fists. The cops got in their car, started the engine, and drove off, slow and quiet, just like they'd come. I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. Karen stayed at her door for a minute, then slammed it shut. The sound echoed down the street, bam, and everything went quiet again. Whiskers didn't even flinch. She just kept napping, her little tail flicking once. But me? I was wide awake now. Something big was happening, and I was right in the middle of it. I sat there on my porch, staring at Karen's house. The cops were gone, but my head was spinning. What just happened? Why were they here? And why did Karen look so scared? I picked up my lemonade and took a sip, but it didn't taste good anymore. The ice was all melted, and it was warm and watery. I set it back down and wiped my hands on my shorts. My brain wouldn't stop asking questions. I looked at Whiskers again. She was still napping, her little paws twitching like she was chasing something in her dreams. She didn't know about the cops or Karen or any of this. She was just a cat, living her happy little life. But me and Tim? We were stuck in this weird mess, and I didn't like it one bit. I grabbed my phone again and texted Tim. They left, I wrote. Karen looked freaked out. What's going on? I hit send and waited, tapping my foot on the porch floor. Tim texted back fast this time. Freaked out? Yeah, she's been like that. Yesterday, I saw her drop her notebook outside and scramble to pick it up, like she didn't want anyone to see it. I read that and tilted my head. Dropping her notebook? Scrambling to pick it up? That wasn't like Karen. She was always so careful with that notebook, always writing in it like it was her most important thing. What was in there that she didn't want anyone to see? I thought about yesterday again. Karen yelling into her phone, calling Whiskers a menace, demanding the cops come. It was so loud, so over the top. And now, the cops show up at her house, and she's a sweaty, shaky mess. It didn't match. If she was so sure Whiskers was the problem, she'd be happy the cops were here, right? She'd be telling them to go get that cat, to fix her big rule-breaking problem. But she wasn't. She was scared. And that made me think the cops weren't here about Whiskers at all. I stood up and walked to the edge of my porch, leaning on the railing. Karen's house looked normal now, white walls, tall fence, curtains closed tight. But it didn't feel normal. It felt like a house with secrets. I squinted, trying to see if she was at her window again, peeking out like Tim said. The curtains didn't move, though. She was probably inside, pacing around, or sitting down, trying to calm herself. I wondered what she was thinking. Was she mad? Scared? Both. I went back to my chair and sat down, crossing my arms. The breeze was still blowing, and it felt nice on my face, but it didn't help me relax. My mind was too busy. I started putting pieces together, like a detective in one of those mystery books. Piece 1, Karen calls 911 about Whiskers, acting like it's a huge deal. Piece 2, cops show up at her house the next day, not mine. Piece 3, she's nervous, sweaty, talking fast, like she's in trouble. Piece 4, Tim says she's been acting strange, peeking out windows, dropping her notebook. What did it all mean? I tapped my fingers on the arm of my chair. Maybe Karen did something bad. Maybe the cops were here about her, not the cat. But what could she have done? She was just the HOA president, not a bank robber or something. She made rules, yelled at people, wrote in her notebook. That was it? Or was it? I started to wonder about that notebook. Tim said she scrambled to pick it up, like it was super important. What was she writing in there? Rules? Complaints? Or something else? I remembered a time a few weeks ago. Karen had been standing on the sidewalk, writing in her notebook, when Mr. Jenkins walked by with his dog. She'd looked up, said hi, then quick closed the notebook and tucked it under her arm. At the time, I didn't think much of it. But now it seemed weird. Like she didn't want Mr. Jenkins to see what she was writing. Was she keeping secrets in that little book? I texted Tim again. What do you think's in her notebook? I asked. She's always writing in it. I waited, watching my phone. Tim's reply came after a minute. No clue, he wrote, but she's weird about it. Maybe it's not just HOA stuff. Not just HOA stuff? My eyes got wide. What else could it be? I pictured Karen scribbling secret plans or lists of people she didn't like. It sounded silly, but after today, I wasn't so sure. I looked at Whiskers again. She was awake now, sitting up and licking her paw. Her green eyes blinked at me, and she meowed once, soft and sweet. Hey, girl, I said quietly. You're causing a lot of trouble, you know that. She tilted her head, like she didn't understand, then went back to licking her paw. I chuckled. Whiskers wasn't causing trouble, Karen was. But maybe Whiskers was the spark that lit the fuse. The street was quiet now, no cops, no kids, just me and Whiskers and a bunch of questions. Karen's door stayed shut, and her curtains didn't move. But I knew she was in there, and I knew she wasn't happy. The cops had spooked her, and I wanted to know why. I had a feeling this was just the start. Something bigger was coming, and Whiskers' little, innocent Whiskers was tangled up in it somehow. I decided to take a walk around the block. I couldn't just sit there anymore, my legs were itchy, and my brain was too full of ideas. I grabbed my phone, slipped on my sneakers, and stepped off the porch. Whiskers looked up at me, her big eyes curious, then went back to napping. Stay there, little troublemaker, I said with a grin. She didn't answer. Of course she was a cat, not a person, but I liked talking to her anyway. The street was warm under my feet as I walked. The sun was higher now, making little shadows from the trees dance on the ground. I passed Tim's house first. His blue paint looked bright in the light, and his porch was empty. I wondered if he was watching TV or maybe peeking out his own window, trying to figure out what was up with Karen. I kept going, past a few more houses, Mrs. Lopez's with her bright flowers, Mr. Jenkins's with his rusty mailbox. Everything looked normal, but it didn't feel normal. When I got closer to Karen's house, I slowed down. Her tall fence blocked most of the view, but I could see her front door through the gate. It was still shut tight, no sign of her. The windows had curtains pulled all the way across, not even a tiny gap. I stopped for a second, pretending to tie my shoe, and glanced around. Nobody was out, no kids, no dogs, just me. I felt like a spy, sneaking around, but I couldn't help it. I wanted to know what was going on. I stood up and kept walking, keeping Karen's house in the corner of my eye. That's when I noticed something. Her trash can was out by the curb, even though trash day wasn't until tomorrow. That was weird. Karen was crazy about rules, and one of her big ones was no trash cans out early. She'd yelled at me about it once, saying it made the street look messy. So why was her can out? I frowned, stepping closer to peek at it. The lid was closed, but I could see a piece of paper sticking out from under it, flapping in the breeze. I looked around again, no one watching, and quick grabbed the paper. It was crumpled, like someone had balled it up and tossed it. I smoothed it out with my hands. It was a note, handwritten in black ink. The writing was messy, but I could read it. It said, "Meeting tonight 8 p.m. Don't be late." That was it, just those words, no names, no place. My heart beat faster. A meeting? Tonight? Who was Karen meeting? And why was this note in the trash? I stuffed the paper in my pocket and kept walking, my mind racing. This was a clue, small, but real. Karen was up to something, and it wasn't just about Whiskers or the HOA. A secret meeting? That sounded sneaky. I thought about the cops again. Maybe they knew about this meeting. Maybe that's why they were here, asking her questions, making her nervous. But what kind of meeting? Was it something bad? Something she didn't want anybody to know about? I circled back to my house, my sneakers slapping the pavement. Whiskers was still on my lawn, now rolling in the grass, her little paws in the air. I sat back on my porch and pulled the note out of my pocket, reading it again. Meeting tonight 8 p.m. Don't be late. I whispered the words to myself, trying to make sense of them. Karen didn't have a lot of friends, she was too grumpy for that. So who was she meeting? And why was it a secret? I texted Tim one more time. Found a note in her trash, I wrote. Says meeting tonight, 8 p.m. What do you think? I hit send and waited, staring at my phone. Tim's reply came quick. Whoa, he wrote. That's weird. Maybe she's planning something big. Be careful, dude. Be careful. I hadn't thought about that. Was this dangerous? Was Karen mixed up in something scary? I looked at Whiskers, then at Karen's house, then back at Whiskers. The day was still sunny, the birds were still singing, but everything felt different now. The cops, the note, Karen's nervous face, it was all adding up to something. I didn't know what yet, but I was getting closer. This cat drama? It was just the start. Something bigger was hiding behind it, and I was going to find out what. A few hours later, everything changed. The sun was still up, but it was getting lower, painting the sky with orange and pink. I was outside, watering my plants. My little red watering can was full, and I was tipping it over my flowers, bright yellow daisies and some purple ones I didn't know the name of. Water splashed onto the petals, making them shiny, and I hummed a little tune to myself. Whiskers was back on my lawn, napping again, her fluffy orange fur glowing in the soft light. It felt like a normal afternoon in Maple Grove. But then, it wasn't. I heard a car engine, low and quiet. I looked up, still holding my watering can, and saw a car pulling up to Karen's house. It wasn't a police car like before. This one was different. It was black, with no markings, no stripes, no lights on top. But it looked important, like it belonged to someone official. The car stopped right in front of Karen's tall fence, and the door opened. A guy stepped out. He was tall, wearing a dark suit like the kind you see in movies about detectives. His hair was short and gray, and he moved fast, like he had somewhere to be. I stopped watering and watched. The suit guy reached into his pocket and pulled out something small. He held it up quick, letting it flash in the sunlight. It was a badge, a shiny gold one, like cops carry. My eyes got wide. A badge? Who was this guy? He didn't look like the other cops from earlier. Those two were still at Karen's house. I could see their police car parked on the street, quiet and still. The two officers were standing near her door, just waiting. And now the suit guy was here, heading straight for them. I set my watering can down on the grass and wiped my wet hands on my shorts. My heart started beating faster, like it knew something big was about to happen. The suit guy walked up Karen's path, his shoes clicking on the pavement. He nodded at the two cops, and they nodded back, like they knew him. Then he knocked on Karen's door, 3 hard knocks, bang, bang, bang. I held my breath, waiting to see what would happen next. The door flew open fast, and there was Karen. She looked wild. Her short brown hair was messy, sticking up in all directions, like she'd been running her hands through it. Her green shirt was wrinkled, and her big sunglasses were gone, showing her eyes wide and scared. She saw the suit guy and froze for a second, her mouth open. Then she started yelling again, just like yesterday. This is outrageous, she shouted, her voice loud and shaky. I've done nothing wrong. You can't just show up like this. She waved her arms, pointing at the suit guy, then at the cops, then back at the suit guy. I stepped closer to my porch railing, trying to hear better. Karen was loud, but the suit guy was calm. He didn't yell back. He just stood there, holding his badge, looking at her with a serious face. The two cops stayed quiet, too, watching her like hawks. Karen kept going, her voice getting higher. I'm the HOA president, she said. I keep this neighborhood perfect. You have no right to bother me. She was puffing up again, trying to act big, but I could see her hands shaking. She wasn't fooling anybody. Then the suit guy spoke. His voice was low but clear, and it cut through Karen's yelling like a knife. I couldn't hear all of it, but I caught two words: warrant and investigation. My jaw dropped. A warrant? An investigation? What did that mean? I knew warrant was something cops needed to search a house like permission from a judge. And investigation meant they were looking into something serious, like a crime. Was Karen in trouble? Real trouble? Karen stopped yelling. She just stopped, right there, like someone flipped a switch. Her arms dropped to her sides, and her face went pale. She stared at the suit guy, her mouth moving a little, but no sound came out. The two cops stepped closer, one on each side of her, like they were ready to grab her if she ran. The suit guy kept talking, but quieter now, so I couldn't hear. He pointed at her house, then at his badge, then at her. Karen shook her head, slow at first, then faster, like she didn't want to believe what he was saying. I couldn't move. I just stood there by my porch, my hands gripping the railing. Whiskers was still napping, her little tail flicking once in a while, but I barely noticed her. All my attention was on Karen's house. This was at the big moment. Something huge was happening, and I was watching it unfold. The suit guy pulled out a piece of paper from his pocket and showed it to Karen. It looked official, with lots of writing on it. She stared at it, her eyes getting bigger, then looked away, like she couldn't stand to see it. The tall cop from earlier said something to her I heard inside, and Karen stepped back into her house. The suit guy and the two cops followed her, disappearing through the door. It shut behind them with a loud thud, and then it was quiet. Too quiet. The street felt empty all of a sudden, like the air was holding its breath. I let go of the railing and sat down on my porch steps, my legs wobbly. What was going on in there? What did they find? I didn't have to wait long to find out. A few minutes later, the door opened again, and the suit guy came out first. He was holding a big stack of papers in his hands, flipping through them as he walked. The two cops came next, and one of them was carrying a box brown and plain, but full of stuff. I couldn't see what was in it, but it looked heavy. Then Karen came out. She wasn't yelling anymore. She wasn't even walking on her own. The tall cop had her arm, holding it tight, and her hands were behind her back. I squinted, then gasped. Handcuffs. Karen was in handcuffs. My heart jumped into my throat. Handcuffs. That meant she was arrested. I stood up fast, almost tripping over my own feet. Karen's head was down, her messy hair falling over her face. She didn't look like the bossy HOA president anymore. She looked small, scared, defeated. The suit guy walked to his car, put the papers in the front seat, and opened the back door. The tall cop led Karen over and helped her inside, her hands still cuffed. The shorter cop followed with the box, putting it in the trunk of the police car. I couldn't believe my eyes. Karen, grumpy, rule-loving Karen, was getting arrested? Right here in Maple Grove. I rubbed my eyes, thinking maybe I was dreaming, but it was real. The suit guy got in his car, the cops got in theirs, and both engines started up. They pulled away from Karen's house, slow and steady, driving down the street past my house. I watched them go, my mouth hanging open. Karen was gone. Just like that. I sat back down on the steps, my head spinning. What just happened? Why was she arrested? I looked at Whiskers, still napping like nothing was wrong. You missed the show, little cat, I said out loud. She didn't wake up, she just purred a little in her sleep. I shook my head and tried to think. The suit guy had said warrant and investigation. The cops had papers and a box. Karen was in handcuffs. It was all so fast, so big, I didn't know where to start. Then it hit me the truth. I didn't hear it from the cops or the suit guy, but I figured it out later, after talking to Tim and some neighbors. Turns out, Karen wasn't just an annoying HOA tyrant. She'd been scamming people, taking extra HOA fees and pocketing the cash. For months, she'd been sneaking money from everybody in Maple Grove. You know those fees we pay to keep the neighborhood nice? Like for fixing the playground or mowing the big field. Karen was supposed to use that money for those things, but she didn't. She kept it for herself, stuffing it in her bank account like a secret treasure. I leaned back against the steps, letting it sink in. Karen had been stealing? From us? I thought about all the times she'd yelled at people about trash cans, about dogs, about Whiskers. She'd acted so perfect, so in charge, but it was all a lie. She wasn't keeping the neighborhood perfect. She was taking our money and pretending everything was fine. And Whiskers? That little cat on my lawn? Karen had used her as a distraction. See, people had started asking questions. Mr. Jenkins had complained a few weeks ago, said the playground still had broken swings, even though we'd all paid extra fees. Mrs. Lopez had asked why the field was full of weeds, when Karen said she'd hired someone to cut it. Karen dodged those questions, saying she'd look into it or fix it soon. But she didn't. Instead, she pointed fingers at little things like Whiskers napping on my lawn to keep us busy. She'd yell about rules and pets and anything else she could think of, hoping we'd forget about the money. But someone figured it out. Someone tipped off the police, I don't know who, but they did. And the cops had been watching her, quiet and sneaky, waiting for the right moment. That 911 call about Whiskers? It was the dumbest move she could have made. She thought she was being smart, making a big fuss about the cat to look like she cared about the rules. But the cops were already closing in, already digging into her secrets. That call just made them move faster. I stood up again, pacing my porch. My sneakers squeaked as I walked back and forth, trying to wrap my head around it. Karen had been scamming us for months, taking our money, lying to our faces, acting like she was the queen of Maple Grove. And all that time, she'd been pointing at Whiskers, calling her a menace, just to keep us from looking too close. It was sneaky. It was mean. And now, it was over. By the end of the day, it was all over. The sun was going down, turning the sky dark blue with little stars popping out. Karen was in handcuffs, her hands stuck behind her back. She didn't look big or bossy anymore, she looked small and mad. The tall cop held her arm tight, walking her to the police car. She was yelling loud, her voice sharp and whiny. "This is injustice," she shouted. "You can't do this to me. I didn't do anything wrong." But nobody listened. The cops didn't care what she said, they just opened the car door and helped her inside. I stood on my porch, watching it all. The police car's back door slammed shut with a loud bang, and Karen's yelling got quieter, muffled by the windows. Her face was red, her messy hair falling over her eyes, but she couldn't fix it with her hands cuffed. The suit guy, the one with the badge, nodded at the cops, like he was saying, "Good job." Then he got in his black car, and the cops got in theirs. The engine started, and both cars drove off, their lights flashing red and blue as they turned the corner. Karen was gone, just like that. The street got quiet for a second, but then the neighbors came out. Doors opened all over Maple Grove, creak, 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 and people stepped onto their porches and lawns. Mr. Jenkins was first, his little dog yapping at his feet. He looked at Karen's house, then at me, shaking his head slow. "What happened?" he called. I waved back. "She stole our money," I said. "HOA fees." Cops caught her. His mouth dropped open, and he muttered, "Well, I'll be," before walking off, still shaking his head. Mrs. Lopez came next, her apron flapping as she hurried out. "Is she really gone?" she asked, her voice loud across the street. I nodded. "Yup, arrested. Took her away." She clapped her hands together and smiled big. "Good. She was mean." More people came, old Mr. Carter with his cane, the young couple holding hands, even the kid with the red bike. They all stood around, whispering to each other, their voices mixing into a soft hum. "Karen's gone. She stole." "Handcuffs." Everybody was shocked, but they weren't sad. They were glad. Tim walked over from his house, his sneakers scuffing the pavement. Whiskers trotted behind him, her fluffy orange tail high in the air. Tim stopped at my porch and bent down to pet her, scratching her head with his fingers. She purred loud, her green eyes half closed. Tim looked up at me and grinned, his teeth showing. "Guess my cat's a hero, huh?" he said. I laughed, a big happy laugh that made my belly shake. "Yeah," I said, "he took down the HOA dragon." We both cracked up, sitting on my porch steps. Whiskers jumped up between us, rubbing against my leg, then Tim's. "You're the best, little guy," I said, petting her soft fur. She meowed back, like she knew she was special. And she was. Whiskers didn't mean to do anything big, she just napped on my lawn like always, but that's what started it all. Karen's yelling about her, that dumb 911 call, it made the cops move fast. Without Whiskers, maybe Karen would have kept stealing for longer. But now she was caught, and we were free. The next few days were wild. People talked about Karen non-stop on their porches, in their yards, even at the little park down the street. Everybody had a story. "She fined me for my trash can," Mr. Jenkins said. "She told me my flowers were too bright," Mrs. Lopez grumbled. "She said my bike was too loud," the kid with the red bike piped up. We all laughed, but we were mad, too. Karen had bossed us around, taken our money, and acted like she was perfect. Now we knew the truth, and it felt good to be rid of her. Then came the next HOA meeting. Oh boy, it was crazy, but the good kind of crazy. It was a week later, in the little clubhouse at the end of the street. The room was small, with white walls and folding chairs all lined up. Usually, Karen ran those meetings, standing at the front with her notebook, telling us what to do. But not this time. She was gone, probably in jail or something, and the room was packed with neighbors. Every chair was full, and people stood in the back, squished together like sardines. I sat near the front with Tim, Whiskers' hero moment still fresh in my mind. The meeting started, and everybody talked at once. "We need new rules," Mr. Jenkins yelled, waving his hand. "Fair ones," Mrs. Lopez added, nodding hard. "No more stealing," the young couple shouted from the back. It was loud, messy, and all over the place. Nobody knew who should be in charge yet, but that was okay. We were figuring it out together. Someone stood up, old Mr. Carter, with his cane and banged it on the floor. Thump, thump. Everybody got quiet. "Let's pick a new president," he said, his voice creaky but strong. "Someone honest." People cheered, clapping their hands. I looked at Tim and grinned. "You should do it," I whispered. He shook his head fast. "No way. Too much work." "Maybe you." I laughed. "Nope, I'm good." We didn't want it, but someone had to take over. By the end of the night, Mrs. Lopez said she'd try. Everybody liked that she was nice and didn't yell. We made new rules, too. Simple ones. No stealing, of course. Fix the playground with the money we had left. Mow the field. And my favorite, no fussing about pets like Whiskers. Let them roam. Tim said, and everybody clapped. It was official, Whiskers could nap on my lawn anytime she wanted, and nobody could say a word. Karen's old rules were gone, tossed out like trash. The meeting ended with smiles and chatter, and we all walked home feeling lighter. Back on my porch the next day, I watched Whiskers. She was napping again, stretched out in the sun, her little paws in the air. She looked like a king or a queen, I guess, ruling over my lawn. I sipped some lemonade, the ice clinking in my glass, and smiled. Karen's reign was over. No more yelling, no more sneaky scams, no more pointing fingers at a little cat. Maple Grove felt free again, like it used to before she got so bossy. Tim came by later, plopping down next to me. "It's nice now, huh?" he said, petting Whiskers. "Yeah," I said. "Real nice." We sat there, quiet and happy, watching the street. Kids rode their bikes, birds chirped, and the wind blew soft. Karen was gone, justice was served, and Whiskers was the star. Maple Grove was ours again, and it felt just right. So, here's the thing, friends, Sometimes the smallest troublemakers like a cat on a lawn end up shining a light on the biggest problems. Think about it. Whiskers didn't do anything special. She didn't bark or fight or cause a big mess. She just napped on my grass, stretching out her little paws in the sun. She was tiny, quiet, and fluffy, an orange ball of fur who liked to sleep. But that little cat turned everything upside down in Maple Grove. How? Because Karen couldn't leave her alone. Karen thought she was the boss of everything. She walked around with her notebook, her big sunglasses, and her loud voice, telling us all what to do. Put your trash can away, she'd yell. Leash your pets, she'd snap. She acted like she owned the whole neighborhood, like she could control everybody with her rules. And for a while, she did. We smiled and waved and followed along, even when we didn't want to. But she didn't see the real danger coming. She didn't see that her own sneaky tricks were about to catch up with her. Whiskers was the spark. Karen got so mad about that cat calling her a menace, dialing 911, making a huge fuss that it made people look closer. It wasn't just about a cat breaking rules. It was about Karen hiding something big. She was stealing our money, taking those HOA fees and keeping them for herself. She thought she was smart, pointing at Whiskers to keep us distracted. But she wasn't smart enough. The cops were watching, waiting, and that 911 call. It was like she handed them the key to catch her. Maybe the lesson here is simple: don't judge too quick, and don't mess with a guy and his cat. Karen judged Whiskers fast, called her a troublemaker, a beast, a problem. She didn't stop to think that a little cat wasn't hurting anybody. She didn't stop to think that Tim, her quiet neighbor, wasn't going to fight back hard. She saw what she wanted to see, and she missed the bigger picture. If she'd left Whiskers alone, maybe she'd still be here, bossing us around. But she didn't, and now she's gone. Tim and his cat won, and they didn't even have to try. I like that idea. It makes me smile. Sometimes, the people or cats who seem small and unimportant are the ones who change everything. Whiskers didn't know she was a hero. She didn't know Karen was a thief or that the cops were coming. She just napped and played and purred, like any cat would. But that was enough. Her little naps on my lawn started a chain that pulled Karen's secrets out into the open. It's funny, right? A cat beat the HOA dragon, just by being herself. So, what do you think, friends? Do you agree with me? I'd love to hear your ideas. Drop them in the comments below. Tell me if you think Whiskers is the real star, or if Karen got what she deserved, or anything else you want to say. This story's been wild, and I want to know what you're thinking now that it's done. Did it make you laugh? Did it surprise you? Let's talk about it. And while you're at it, here's something fun: what's the wildest neighbor story you've got? I bet you've got some good ones. Maybe you had a grumpy lady like Karen, yelling about silly rules. Or maybe you had a cool neighbor like Tim, with a pet that caused a ruckus. Whatever it is, I want to hear it. Write it in the comments. Make it short or long, funny or crazy, whatever you like. I'll read every single one, I promise. Thanks for sticking with me through this whole adventure, friends. It's been a ride, hasn't it? From that sunny day when Karen called 911, to the cops showing up, to that big arrest with handcuffs, it's been a lot. I had so much fun telling you the story, picturing Whiskers napping and Karen yelling and all of us figuring it out together. If you liked it, give it a big thumbs up. Let me know you enjoyed the ride. It means a lot to me when you do. This story's got me thinking about a lot of stuff. Like how things aren't always what they seem. Karen looked like a rule keeper, but she was a rule breaker. Whiskers looked like a troublemaker, but she was a helper. It's a reminder to look closer, you know? Don't just believe what's on the outside. Dig a little deeper, and you might find something amazing or something sneaky, like Karen's scam. Either way, it's worth it to find out. And it's got me thinking about standing up, too. Not with yelling or fighting, but just by being you. Whiskers didn't stand up to Karen. She didn't have to. She just kept napping, kept being her cute little self, and that was enough. Tim didn't fight either. He sighed and walked away when Karen yelled. But they still won. They didn't need to be loud or mean. They just kept going, and the truth came out. Maybe that's a lesson for us, too: keep being you, even when someone tries to push you down. The good stuff always shines through. Maple Grove's different now. It's quieter, but happier. No more Karen stomping around with her notebook. No more fake rules about cats or trash cans. We've got Mrs. Lopez running the HOA now, and she's nice, she even brings cookies to meetings. The playground's getting fixed, the field's getting mowed, and Whiskers naps wherever she wants. It's like the neighborhood woke up from a bad dream, and we're all smiling again. So, let's end with this, friends, be like Whiskers. Not the napping part, well, maybe that, too, but the part where you don't let the grumpy Karen stop you. Be yourself, do your thing, and don't worry about the loud voices trying to boss you around. You might not see it right away, but you're stronger than you think. You might even shine a light on something big, just by being you. How cool is that? Alright, that's it for now. Thanks again for hanging out with me. You're the best, and I can't wait to see you next time. Tell me those neighbor stories in the comments, give me a thumbs up if you like this, and let's keep the fun going. What's the next wild tale you want to hear? I'm ready to tell it. See you soon, friends, bye for now.